Goeiemorgen. Mijn naam is D'Angelo. Eagles. Thank you. Where the back home here? Some of the things that I learned about South Africa consist of one, realizing the fact that Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years. That is a fact that I did not know, which is also very surprising because one, that is my entire lifespan. With me recognizing and understanding that I have been on this earth for 27 years, and yet a man had been in prison for 27 years with two different lives is incredible, right? Throughout the history film, I noticed a lot of these figures talk about how Nelson Mandela transformation outside of prison and his reputation, and how he showed up was completely different than an imprisoned mindset, right? They spoke about his spirituality, how he showed up. They talked about just his presence altogether, but also how that experience pretty much transformed him all the way around, which led him to transform an entire country. They spoke about how he showed up, which he showed up representing the country, but also advocated that individuals learn about the African language in order to understand one another or to understand these individuals, which I think that's a very valid point because sometimes individuals do not take the time to really learn a heritage or learn a culture or learn an individual to truly comprehend, but truly just to not to just really acknowledge the things that make up an individual, which that's super important. And I feel like in order to understand one another, we have to do that background research. Another fact that I didn't realize was the diversity that is within South Africa. I imagine just a bunch of black people. However, there is white individuals. However, there is Chinese individuals, and there's Indian individuals that I also learned about within South Africa regions. I also learned that it is proper for South African guests to dress appropriately to whatever the host may request, right? Sometimes we get invitations that has a guideline to dressing, but to always be respectful, you should reach out to the host in order to know what the occasion or what the attire may be. I took note on the dimension that Hofstad also created, which I also found very interesting. Just going down the list, I can see why the United States had the highest rank in the individual and collective culture. That was very spot on. Just being in America, we get a lot of individuals who are simply for themselves. They're all about boosting themselves. And again, just being in America, this has been my experience. However, being on the contrary, I'm always looking to help and encounter individuals who want to accept my help, but also help me at the same time. So I'm really a equal take type of individual, which I also learned that South Africa individuals are for a win-win situation, which means that they benefit from whatever the transaction or whatever the interaction may be, which seems very reasonable. I also learned that Korean value long-term orientation, which also makes sense why their heritage and their culture has lasted so long. But when it comes to business, in a business sense, while their business and their establishments are super successful because they shoot for long-term goals and long-term operations. I really didn't understand where South Africa may fall on Hofstad culture list or breakdown, but that's something that I'll look to investigate a little bit more. But I thought it was interesting just as I went through that list that, again, as all humans, we all go through that phase from individualism to collectivism to a power distance, the balance of masculine and femininity, the uncertainty and avoidance, long-term orientation, indulgence, and resistance. I think it just, again, goes down to the individual and how much they're willing to develop and what they're looking to learn out of these experiences. I also learned that South Africans, especially men and women, they do not shake hands. They just nod their head and greet it. So that's something I'm going to be very conscious and aware about.